It's round 3 of the Grand Chess 2 SuperUnited Croatia Rapid End Blitz 2025. It's a rapid event for now. Many top players are playing the tournament, including Magnus Carlsen. It's a close tournament. And the game we are going to analyze is played between Pragg versus Gukesh. You ask me what's so special about this game? Because both the players are at their very top. Gukesh is the world champion. Praggnanandhaa in 2025 is at his peak performance. The tournament he is playing, he's winning the tournament. That's it. So you see, in this video, I'm going to completely break down this game into the most easiest manner. And as I always say, if you really want to improve your chess, you must analyze the games of the very top players. So here it is. Make sure to watch the game till the end and let's begin. Okay, so Pragg with the white pieces decides to open up the game with one knight f3. The ready opening. We have d5 by Gukesh, g3, and now bishop to g4. Basically developing the bishop already outside the pawn chain. And now bishop to g2. And now we sort of have the king's Indian attack setup from the white side, which is a very nice setup to play with the white pieces. And now c6. And now after c6, one thing is kind of clear. Like once you put the pawns in this way, you need to understand now the bishop on g2 is a bad piece, because you see now the bishop is kind of steering the pawn on d5, which is protected by the c6 pawn, and the c6 pawn is protected by the b7 pawn. So generally, if you want to kind of neutralize the bishop, you should try to put your pawns like this. And after h3, the bishop goes back, and now we have d4 by Pragg. You can castle as well, which is a very flexible move. I believe castle is a much better move, because after castle up, you're keeping the option open. Maybe you want to play d3. Maybe you want to play d4. But still, d4 is absolutely fine move. And now we have e6. And after e6, the point is very clear. Gukesh has already developed his bishop outside the pawn chain now. It's a good bishop. And now he's putting the pawns on the light squares, which is a very good idea. And after e6, we have castle by Pragg. Gukesh develops the knight. And now we have c4 by Praggnanandhaa. And after c4, already at the first glance, our instinct says, okay, it's a free pawn, let's check it out. But after dc4, it's not really going to work up, because we have knight to e5. And now, you see, you can't really defend the pawn on c4 anymore. If you play b5, you lose the c6 pawn, and white is already winning. So capturing on c4 is not a great idea. And like after dc4, knight e5, you see, once I capture this pawn, white is the one having full control of the center, and white is already better. So that's why dc4 was not played in the game, and we have bishop e7. And now, many of the players must be thinking, and you must think, that, okay, what if I first capture the knight, and after bishop takes, now I will capture the pawn on c4, because now there is no knight e5 in the position. Yeah, that's a very true question. Because after dc4, there is no knight e5. So how are you going to continue the position? First of all, you need to understand the position now. White is the one having the bishop pair advantage. And the best way to continue the position, and the most easiest way, would be to play a4. Because after a4, black can't play b5, because after takes, the rook is hanging on a8. And once again, there is no good way for black to defend the pawn on c4. So for example, after a5, now we are going to play knight a3, just attacking the pawn with the knight. You can also play queen c2, that's absolutely fine move, but you lose the pawn, you see. So just knight a3, and now black have to take the knight. That's the only option to defend the pawn. And after, now both the moves are absolutely fine, b8 and rook a3. Rook a3 is more of a principled way, where after knight d7, rook c3, knight b6. Now after e4, you see, black is indeed a pawn up, but not for long. White is having both the bishop pair advantage and nice center, and on the next move, I'm going to play b3, sacrifice one more pawn, but in exchange, I'm having open b file, complete center control, and after rook d1, d5, white is already, positionally speaking, outplaying black already, and as you can see with the help of the evaluation bar, it's already white who is better. Which is absolutely fine way, but the most creative way, which I personally like to play with the white pieces, would be to simply capture the bishop with the pawn. It looks like white is having double pawns on the a file, which is very true, but in the exchange, now white is having rook b1, attacking the pawn, queen c2, recapturing the pawn, just play e3, protect the pawn, and white is the one very, very happy in this position, absolutely no problem, and very easy, most importantly, very easy to play with the white pieces. So that's why bishop f3 is also not working up, and you must remember this. So Gukesh played bishop e7, simply developing the bishop, and he wants to castle up, which is the basic fundamental in chess. We have knight c3, castle up, and now we have the move knight to e5 by Praggnanandhaa, which is a good move. Another move which comes in my mind, because you see, you're kind of moving the same piece twice, which is fine in this position because you have castled up, you have developed your pieces, and now many beginners would be thinking we should try to develop the bishop because we have already developed the knight, so why aren't we developing the bishop? We are not really developing the bishop because we are kind of in doubt. We don't really know where the bishop belongs. Maybe the bishop belongs on f4. Maybe the bishop belongs to g5. Or maybe, who knows, we can play b3, bishop b2, or even bishop d2, who knows. You see, there are many possibilities for the bishop. So knight e5 was played in the game. But another move which comes to my mind, which also makes sense in the fundamental level, is to play the move queen b3, and which is the best move. You see, you are developing your queen now. You are attacking the b7 pawn, and you are also protecting the c4 pawn. And after queen b3, for example, after queen b6, it's a London type position. After c5 takes checks. If you're a London player who likes to play the London opening, I believe this position is already a bit familiar with you. Because after ab3, now white is having a very interesting way to continue the position, which is b4, b5. White is having the open a file for the rook. Knight d2, knight b3, knight a5, attacking b7, putting the bishop on f4, a nice diagonal for the bishop. And that's the perfect play that white wants. It's very, very easy to play with the white pieces. But unfortunately, black can simply chop off the knight in this position and play e5. After takes knight d7, after b4, in order to protect the c5 pawn, takes. The position is equal. White is having the bishop advantage, open a file. But on the other hand, black is having a very solid pawn structure. White's pawn are doubled up on the b file. So you see, anything can happen in this position, and at the same time, it's very fun to play. Now, many beginners would like to play b6. Why? You are just pushing the pawn, defending the pawn. But already it's not the best way to continue, because after knight e5, first of all, you can't move the knight from the b square because the c6 pawn would be hanging. Currently, the knight is defending it. So black have to play knight d7 in order to trade off the knight. But white can simply take on d5. First, you can't really take it back with the pawn because after knight d5, you see, with the power of the bishop, the rook is hanging up. If you capture the knight, I capture the bishop first, giving a check, and then I will simply recapture it. I would be a pawn up. So you have to forcefully capture the knight, and after queen d5, the rook is hanging up. Sorry about that. The rook is hanging up, so the black knight have to capture the knight, and after queen e5, the rook is hanging, the bishop is hanging. I would be 2 pawns up, and that's completely winning position for white. So going back, that's exactly why b6 would also not be working, and that's a bad idea. But okay, knight e5 was played, which is absolutely fine. And now we have knight d7. Gukesh is simply trying to develop the pieces, which is a great idea. And now we have g4 by Pragg. His idea all along with knight e5 is after bishop g6, he wants to capture the bishop on g6, which is a great idea. Now, Pragg is having the bishop pair advantage. But in exchange, the king side has been a bit overextended, which could lead to some problems in the future on the king side. We have queen d3 by Pragg, defending the pawn on c4. And who knows, maybe preparing to strike in the center with e4. We have bishop d6, Gukesh realizing that the bishop on e7 is not really doing much. So bishop d6, maybe hoping for a center break with e5. We have rook d1, Pragg trying to get the rook. You see, the bishop is Pragg is kind of still unknown where the bishop belongs, and even the position is unknown where the bishop belongs. So that's why we have rook e8, Gukesh simply developing his pieces. And now finally, Pragg decided to develop the bishop on g5, pinning up the knight. You see, there is no pawn on h7, so black can't really play h6, attack the bishop. So g5 is a good square for the bishop. We have queen c7, and after queen c7, black idea is pretty simple. He just moved the queen from this pin, and now he simply wants to play rook d8, and that's it. And now, you see, black also want to play the move bishop to f4, which is a very strong move. You ask me why? What is the idea of bishop f4? You see, as I said in the start, white is having the bishop pair advantage now. So black would love to trade off the bishop with bishop f4. So Pragg decided to play the move bishop d2, which is a good move. At the first glance, when I was analyzing the game, to record the video, I thought, okay, what happens with rook c1? Like, white simply trying to develop the pieces. After bishop h2 check and bishop f4, you see after a bishop trade, king g1 because the f2 is hanging, rook d8, e4. Like in this position, you see black has gotten all his pieces into the game. Engine says it's an equal position, white is even slightly better, but practically speaking, I believe black is having the edge. Why? Because for example, if white continues with e4, which looks very logical, after a couple of trades in the center, knight f6, bishop goes back, rook e7, rook d7, I can already generate pressure on the d4 pawn. And now white is the one who is completely defending now an entire game, and black would be the one pressing with the black pieces, and that's pretty logical. So you see, that's why I believe, practically speaking up, keeping the bishop pair is a very great idea. So bishop d2 makes sense, so that after bishop f4 he can play e3. And now we have rook d8 by Gukesh. And this is a position where Praggnanandhaa messed up something really bad. After rook d8, he should have played rook c1, get all his pieces into the game, and it is a position where both the players need to play a slow chess. Like they just need to improve the pieces. Maybe b6, maybe a6, white can play a3, b4, e3, just trying to play some slow chess. The player who tries to open up the position will simply backfire. In this position, like for example after rook c1, if black tries to open up the position with dc4, white can capture it back, and black is like, okay, I have gotten all my pieces, so let me try to attack in the center with e5. It's already backfiring after d5. And after a couple of trades, you can realize the bishop is hanging, the pawn is hanging, and white is the one in complete control with the help of the bishop pair advantage. Because if you try to open up the position, white would be the one on the advantage side because it helps white's bishop to get activated. Instead, Pragg played the move c5. And what he thought was very logical. What he thought was, if the bishop goes back, he can play f4. Because in this position, black wants to achieve e5 break somehow. After f4, you kind of completely stops it. And positionally speaking, now it's going to be a one-side attack after e3, just protecting the pawns. And now just b4, a4, b5, simply jumping in on the queen side, and it's a completely one-sided play. And another move that Pragg thought, I believe, was bishop f4. He can play e3, the bishop goes back, and now once again f4 with the same idea. Also threatening g5, the bishop is bad on h6. But what he missed was something amazing, which is bishop h2 check by Gukesh. He thought after king h1, the bishop is not really having any squares available, so bishop h2 doesn't make any sense. But what he missed was something insane, and also brilliancy at the same time, which is e5. And after e5, you see white's brilliancy, because after king takes, there is simply pawn takes. It's a check, you have to move the king, I can capture the knight, and you see, now if you try to capture the pawn with the queen, you lose e2. If you capture with the bishop, you lose c5. Black would be a pawn up with a completely winning position. Practically yes. So that's why it's not really happening up. You can't really capture the bishop. So Pragg is like, okay, let me play e3. He played e3, and he understands the position that, okay, he's not really going to capture the bishop, but still the bishop is not really having any square to go back, which makes sense. Gukesh played knight f8, which is a very amazing move and the best move in the position. And to be true, it's very hard to find it. He's trying to improve the bishop. He's simply trying to improve the knight. He wants to put the knight on e6, take on d4, and make a square for the bishop to go back on f4, which is simply amazing. We have knight e2 by Pragg. Maybe he wants to capture the bishop, though he can't really do it because now there is e4 check and you lose the queen with a check. So knight e6 and now bishop c3. And now finally Gukesh decided to chop off the pawn. And now we have bishop d4. If white captures the pawn back, you can play bishop f4. Simply now the bishop is pretty happy. Though there is no need for you to go back with the bishop because the queen is currently defending the bishop. But okay, we have bishop d4. And now finally Gukesh is like, okay, now let me simply go back with the bishop. And I'm pretty happy. Why black is pretty happy and why engine is showing that black is seriously better? Why it's minus 0.9? Because you need to understand, now black has kind of opened up the position in such a way that the light square bishop is now bad. because thanks to the pawns on the light squares. Black has achieved e5 break with no disturbances on the pawn on b7, c6 and d5, which makes the g2 bishop bad. At the same time, now there is a good square for the knight to hop on e4. The c5 is a bit weak and black is overall pretty happy. So Pragg is like, okay, let me play b4. And now we have a5 by Gukesh, which is fine. I believe another way for any intermediate or club level player to understand this position and make it easier for yourself to play is to simply take on d4. After knight d4, queen d4, you need to understand you can simply play now knight e4. The bishop is bad. If you try to take it after rook e4, black is pretty happy. f5 is coming up, and as I said, king side is very weak. You can play f5 in the future now. And even if white tries to play king g1 defending the f2 pawn, still after f5 you see the king side is weak, and I believe it's already very hard to play with the white pieces. Black is pretty happy, and that's it. Instead, as you know, these guys are monsters. They like to keep the maximum pieces on the board because they want results. They don't want a draw. We have a5, a3, and now rook 8 by Gukesh, which is fine. And now king to g1, just trying to improve the king. And now you see many players would like to take on b4, but you see after taking on b4, you are not really achieving anything. You have traded on b4 for sure, but you have absolutely achieved nothing. That's the only reason the bar has dropped a bit. Knight d7 by Gukesh, just improving the knight. He understands that the knight on f6 is absolutely doing nothing, so I'm going to pull my knight back to d7. Though once again, a possible way to continue the position would have been bishop d4, knight d4, and the same step with knight d4. Instead, he played the move knight d7, which is fine. Queen goes to c3, and finally we have a trade, and now bishop f6. The whole idea of knight d7 for Gukesh was to put the bishop on f6 and then put the knight on e5 to c4. It looks very promising in the eye, but to be true, the idea of knight e5, knight c4 is a very wrong idea for Gukesh, which he is going to execute in the future. Because despite, just try to imagine, even if the knight has achieved the square on c4, the knight on c4 is absolutely doing nothing. It looks very strong, but it is not really doing anything. So we have rook b1 by Pragg, trying to achieve something with b5, knight e5, b5, and now knight c4. You see now engine shows white is somehow slightly better. cb5, knight b5 would have been a very bad idea because now d5 is weak, b7 is weak, so capturing on b5 is a bad idea. So we have knight c4, and now a4 was played by Pragg, just pushing the pawn, as you can't really take because of knight b5. We have rook c8 by Gukesh. Now, in this position, if you try to take on cb5, now there is rook b5, because in order to protect the c pawn in order to protect the c5 pawn, now rook b1 is coming up, d5 pawn is weak, and white is completely winning. So we have rook c8 by Gukesh, which is good, and now queen to d3 by Pragg. Now in this position, Pragg should have took on c6 and played the move e4, which is a very strong idea, because first of all you can't take on e4 because the knight is hanging, and now white is the one who wants to take on d5. So after cd5, the b5 square is available for the rook, defending the pawn, putting pressure on the d5 pawn, and also at the same time the d5 pawn would be weak because the bishop on g2 would be putting maximum pressure on the d5 pawn. Instead, it was a rapid game. We definitely can't expect from both the players to play the best chess with 100% accuracy. We have queen d3. The idea of queen d3 is pretty logical. He's just trying to move the queen away from the spin. So queen d3, queen e7, just attacking the pawn on c5, and now we have takes, and now rook d to c1, just giving up the pawn on c5. If white tries to defend with knight b3, there is simply knight b2 and you lose an exchange. You have to give up the exchange. So it's a blunder. So rook c1 was played because you can't really defend the pawn, and after queen c5, at this junction, Praggnanandhaa has to accept the fact that he's having a bad position. He is a pawn down, and he can continue with bishop f1, and he somehow needs to understand this position and accept the fact he is having a bad position. Pragg is a very calculative player. He was only having seconds on his clock Gukesh, on the other hand, was having 6 minutes. Pragg decided to take on c6, sacrificing the knight. His idea was pretty clear that after queen c6, which was played in the game, after bishop d5, if you try to move the queen, I can simply capture the rook. I can simply capture the knight. I would be a pawn up, and white would be the one pressing for the win, which makes sense. But what the move he missed was amazing, which is knight e5. And the fact he missed this move because he was having seconds on his clock. After knight e5, the queen is simply hanging up. The knight is defended now, so we have queen d1. If white tries to simplify the position with bishop c6, after knight d3, bishop takes, just takes, you can understand black is a piece up. So we have queen d1, and now black simply moves the queen. We have a trade of rooks, f4, the knight goes back, g5, and now Gukesh played a very strong move, and once another brilliancy, which is bishop to d4. And after bishop d4, Pragg decides to resign the game. Why? If you take the bishop, I can take the bishop. You lose the pawn and you lose everything because I'm also a piece up. If you take the knight, I'll just give a check first and then I'll simply capture the bishop. That's still it. I'm a pawn up, I'm a piece up, that's completely winning. So you see, that's the reason Praggnanandhaa decides to resign the game after bishop d4, and a very strong chess played by both the players. The only difference was Praggnanandhaa thought maybe c5 is working for him, but the moves he missed was bishop h2 and a very strong e5 idea, which you need to understand the position. Like, you need to be positionally very strong in order to play the move bishop h2 and keeping the bishop on h2 as it is for 4 to 5 moves, which was exactly happened in the game, which is simply unbelievable play by Gukesh to beat Praggnanandhaa, which shows how fighting players all the Indian players are. So yeah, that's it for this game. I hope that you guys have loved the analysis of the game, and now you are having a complete idea of what happened in the game, what were the mistakes happened in the game, and definitely this game would have definitely helped you to improve your chess. If it did, make sure to like, share, and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.